All right. I take it that means we're up and running?
Yeah, Donald's here. We could give everyone 5 minutes, I think, Baba, if that's okay, to give people
Hey,
time to log
not a
in.
problem.
But I'm ready to go. And
But you
hi,
just got
Donald.
here. That's my first bad pun. You said you're ready to go, and I said, but you just got here. I can't help myself.
Yeah, yeah. We're separated by the same language, aren't we?
I was waiting for that to pop up.
Yeah.
Ah, Evita just joined us. Norman just joined us.
Norman, my
Yeah,
favorite
Norman.
Canadian. Evita's on in the cafe.
Yes. Oh, that's right. She is.
Oh, Lenny. Hi, Lenny.
Hey, Evita, have a glass of hot tea on me.
How are we doing, everyone?
Very well, Governor.
John the Row is here.
Done.
Okay. So
John the Governor's here.
are we on Facebook yet?
Yes, that's her. Hello,
Okay.
John.
Hi. I'll see you on Tuesday. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys and assembled company, welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe. It is Friday. It is time for Tales for Children. And as you can see, we have thousands of children live on watching. We've got Norman Perrin, who's a very hairy child. We've got Baba C, the very bald child. Donald Nelson, who's a very almost invisible child. Ah, there he is. And etc. And there's Lenny, and there's Uda, and of course there is the representative of the under-20s, King Louis himself. Fantastic. So without without further ado, and ignoring all these little pop-ups that come up on the screen, we have none other than the amazing Keith Rogers this evening. Keith, take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And happy to do this session, Stories for Children. And I'd like to take us back to the Middle Ages, almost a history lesson. So imagine, if you will, a bleak dawn morning and a castle, a grey stone castle. And at the very edge of the castle, there is a gate. And standing at the gate, there is a king and his wife. For these were troubled times. And the king was always under pressure from the powerful barons who ruled their own domains, but they would be king. But the worst of it is, the one who is most at threat when the king is under threat is his heir. And the queen is holding a baby wrapped in a blanket on that cold morning. And as they stand, two horsemen arrive, one a knight in armor, clearly an escort, and the other a strange man with a long grey beard and a purple cloak. And he dismounts, the king's most trusted counselor, and he walks forward and he takes the baby into his arms as the queen reluctantly hands it over. And not a word is said as the couple go back in through the gate. And the counsellor in his long purple robe climbs upon his horse with the baby carefully cradled in his lap. And they set off. They set off, the counsellor and his bodyguard, and they ride for 3 days and 3 nights, way, way away from that castle into the land of Sauvage, an ancient woodland full of moss and lichens. And they arrive at the castle Sauvage again at dawn, and they rap on the door, and a servant answers, and he sees the two standing there, and he immediately turns to fetch his master. The councillor now has dismounted and is holding the baby in his arms, and he walks forward as Sir Ector, for this is the land of Sir Ector, his domain, and the castle Sauvage is his home. And he knows these men are important men. He doesn't question why they've arrived, but steps forward to take the child. And all the man in the long purple robe says to him, his name is Arthur. And he turns and he climbs onto his horse, and the knight, waking to see all is safe, leads him away. And as Sir Ector carries the little bundle back into his castle, there is a child crying from a further room, for he is his own son, a year older than this Arthur. And they know what they must do. They must look after this child and bring it up almost as their own. But everyone, the servants, everyone around the village will know this is a foundling. And of course, in the nature of names, Arthur very quickly becomes Wart. And he's a skinny little child as he grows up with Kay, his brother, to all intents and purposes, for they are almost the same age, and they play together, they run in fields, they climb trees, they swim in the river, and they are fed and looked after by loving parents. And there is always to Sir Ector the shadow of that day when the baby was handed over. But not for the children, not for the children who grow up together, as I say. But as they reach into those teenage years, Kay becomes aware of his station in life. For as the son of Sir Ector, he will too become a knight. And one day, as the sun shines upon them and they're lying in a field, as children do, relaxing after a day of running about and swimming and climbing, Kay turns to Wart and says, one day, he says, I will be knighted. I will become a knight. I will go to tournaments. People will look up to me. Eventually, this will be my castle. And you, Wart will not be forgotten, for you will be my page. And Wart liked the sound of that. He didn't know what a page was, but he liked the sound of traveling to tournaments with his friend. And the day did come where he was to be knighted. But it was a special day, for in the city, many miles away, there was to be a tournament, but not an ordinary tournament, for the king had just died. And the barons were all positioning themselves, that moment of seizing power. And the city was full of talk of the tournament and who would be the new king. The family set off in a carriage with carts with all the equipment. Kay was so excited, for this was the day he was to become a knight. He would stand before the barons, and his shoulder would be touched with his sword, and he would become Sir Kay. And he would take part in the sword fights and the lances in the lists. But it was a long, long journey. And they arrived late at night into their lodgings, and everything was unpacked, ready for the next day. And Sir Kay, what he was to become, was nervous, for he was not used to being at the forefront. He was not used to being the center of attention, for the Castle Sauvage was a quiet community that Sir Ector oversaw with justice and compassion. And this place full of all these people, this place with its sounds and its smells and its clattering as they set off toward the tournament the next day, for there was to begin the tournament with a march of the new knights, a march of those young men who were about to be deemed to be a knight. And they would walk around and they would raise their swords and they would say, "All hail," even though there was not a king to be seen. You can imagine how Sir Kay felt on this occasion. They had a small pavilion, the small pavilions of the young men all lined one side, and the great marquees of the barons lined the other side with their entourage. And there was a great field in between, and that wooden thing that separated when they galloped together with their lances, and the ground where they fought with their swords. And there was a hush over this place. A disaster. Disaster, for as Wart helped Sir Kay on with his armor and his ceremonial garbs, they realized that he has left his sword in the lodgings. How could he have done such a thing? He turned to Wart and in a sharp voice, like a master to servant, said, "What? Go back to the lodgings, fetch my sword, and if you are quick, I will give you a shilling." Wart was stung. This was his brother talking to him like he was a servant. This was a sharp tone that he was not used to. But he didn't argue, for he wanted him to be there in the parade with his sword. And he set off back through the streets toward the lodgings, back through the empty streets with all those buildings hanging over the road. And he got back to the lodgings, but there was no one there. Everyone was at the tournament. He went round the back. There was no ostler. There was no servants. Everyone was at the tournament. And he wondered what to do. There was no way in. So he turned to go back, and he wasn't sure which way, but he knew the direction. He was a smart boy. So he set off in the direction of the tournament, wondering what he would say to Kay, whether he could procure a sword from someone else. But as he reached a square, there was a strange sight. For there was a stone plinth with an anvil on top of it. And within the anvil was sunk a sword. Now he climbed on the plinth and took the hilt of the sword with no hope of taking it out, for it was stuck fast in this anvil. But as he pulled it, it slid out easily, with no effort whatsoever. And he looked at this wonderful sword, bigger than Kay's sword, more magnificent than Kay's sword, but a sword nonetheless. And he set off carrying it and arrived at the marquee. And Kay looked and said, "That's not my sword." He said, "It's a sword," said Wart. "It's a sword, take it." And the trumpets blared, and they called the young men to parade round the tournament grounds. And Sir Kay did not argue, but joined the procession. And as the whole line of young men who were about to be knights stood in front of the barons and raised their swords and shouted, and a cheer went up that was nipped in the bud. For they all looked at Kay, and they all looked at the sword that he held. For Sir Ector and his family didn't know what had happened. They didn't know that a plinth and an anvil with a sword embedded in it had appeared in a square in the city. That everyone talked about the inscription, "Whosoever shall wrest this sword from the anvil is the rightful king of England." They had seen none of this. They had heard none of this. But he saw the baron speak to his counsellor, and the counsellor walked forward and said, "How did you come by that sword?" And Kay stuttered. I left my sword in the lodging, and I sent my page, and he came back with this sword." And there was a silence. And the tournament was held. And the procession of the baron and his entourage made their way to that square, and they filled the square. And Wart was called forward, and the sword was placed back in the anvil. And several knights in the baron's entourage stepped forward, big men, strong men, and gripped the hilt and pulled till they were red in the face, and they could not move it 1 inch. And then Wart, the embarrassed, skinny boy, was called up onto the plinth, and he took the hilt in his hands, and the sword slipped out with ease, with no effort at all. And as the assembled company gasped, a figure in a long purple robe stepped forward, and he pointed around and said, "Know this, the inscription, for whosoever shall take this sword from the anvil is the rightful king of England." And this boy, this skinny boy, was taken as a baby from the king and the queen. And this boy is the heir to our throne. As Wart stood there, embarrassed, the assembled company took their knee and proclaimed, "Long live King Arthur." And that is the story of the sword in the stone. Now, we already know, don't we? We already know what a great king Arthur became, and he led his men in battles, and he saved England from foes. And there are many, many stories that are associated with his bravery and his prowess. But the one I like the most is the story I'm about to tell you. For it is a very interesting story of its time. And if you'd like to imagine now this young skinny boy grown into a strong man, a fine warrior, a great hunter. And imagine King Arthur out in a hunting party, and he has the front of the assembled company as they gallop through the countryside looking for deer to hunt. And suddenly, a young stag bursts from cover. It is across one field before the others can react, but Arthur has reacted, and his horse kicked into has chased after it. Over one field after two fields. His company left way behind, and a big mistake because he followed the deer into the woods. And the paths in woods are uncertain. And sure enough, his horse trod in a hole, and he was thrown forward and crashed to the ground. As he picked himself up, winded, he received a blow to the back of the head, and everything went black. And he awoke, tied to a chair in a cave that had that clawing smell of moss and vegetation, of rotting meat. He looked around, and there was a giant with a club by the side, the club that had laid him low. "I shall have your head," said the giant, "but I am a sporting man. I will set you a task, a riddle if you like, and if you can come back in a year and a day with the answer to my riddle, then you shall be free. But if you cannot answer it, your life is forfeit." It's not a choice, is it? It's not a choice, offered a task or a death. And the giant knew that Arthur, as a man of honor, would come back after a year and a day with his answer to the riddle. So Arthur sat calmly waiting to find out what the riddle might be. And the giant said this: "What I want you to answer for me is what women most desire." Arthur thought that sounded like a simple question to him, but he said nothing. He was untied, and when he stepped out of the cave into the fresh air, breathing it in, his horse was standing there, munching at the grass. And he climbed on the horse and he set off back toward his palace. And when he arrived at the palace, there was great jubilation, for they thought they had lost their king. And he arrived in the courtyard, all cobbles and clattering hooves. And immediately he sat down his council and told them of his dilemma. And it was their purpose to find out the question to what women most desire. And the philosophers and counselors all over the country set off to answer this question. And given it was the Middle Ages, it won't surprise you at all to know that they didn't actually ask women. For they thought they knew everything. They thought they understood the world and people's thoughts and what women want. And after a year, and almost a year and a day, there were 12 books of suggestions for what women want. And you can imagine how shallow they were. Great jewels, a rich husband, fine clothes, travel, all those things that are deemed shallow. And with a cart full of these books, Arthur set off toward the giant's cave. And he had only gone halfway when he was traveling through a wood, and there was a clearing and a glade. And in the glade, there were fairy folk dancing in a circle, round and round and round. And the song was bewitching. But stranger still, in the middle of the circle was an old crone, a woman bent double, with brown moss in her hair. And when she looked up, her teeth were green and black, and she had a hook nose and a complexion of warts and sores. And she called out to him. She called out to him saying, "Do I know your task?" And he stopped for why not another suggestion? He says, "Do I know your task?" So he sighed and he said, "Yes, yes. Word has spread around the nation. I am to tell the giant what women most desire. And I can tell you the answer," she said. He sighed again and listened. "The answer to your question is women most desire to be in control of their own destiny." Arthur thought this was unlikely. Why would women want to be in control of their own destiny when there were men to look after them who knew better than they did? "But there is a price to pay if I'm right," she said. "You will call in on your return. For return you will be, for that is the answer." And Arthur sighed and carried on his journey. And he arrived at the giant's cave with his cart, and he unloaded all his books, and he sat in that chair, no longer tied, and the giant was sat in his huge chair, and he said, "I am ready." So he went through many of the reasons, and each thing he said, the shallow things like jewels and so on, the giant shook his head and said no each time. No, 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 no. It began to occur to Arthur that all these fine philosophers and counselors didn't, in fact, have the answer to this question. And his life could, in fact, hang in the balance. But then he remembered what the old woman had said. He went, as though he'd been toying with the giant all along. He said, "I think the answer to your question is what women most desire is to be in control of their own destiny." And the giant stared, and he ground his teeth, and he said, "You have it. You have my answer. You are free to go." And Arthur was surprised, but pleased, and set off out of the cave into the fresh air again, climbed on his cart, and set off back toward his palace. And as he was going through the forest, he passed the glade, and he stopped, for there she was, standing there, bent over, looking at him, waiting for him to answer. "You were right," he said. "Now," she said, now is my price." You are now to take me back to your palace and find a husband for me. She climbed up next to him on the car, and as they rattled along toward the palace, he was wondering which one of his knights would agree to marry this old crone. But of course, he also knew that he could choose a volunteer. They arrived back in the courtyard before, with the rattle of wooden wheels and horses' hooves, and the company assembled again with great relief. They had not lost their king this time. And they assembled, and there by his side was the old crone. And Arthur pronounced it. This woman gave me the answer to the riddle. This woman gave me my freedom and my life. And all she requests is that one of you should agree to become her husband. There were some shifty looks. People fidgeted. They tried not to catch the king's eye, and they looked at each other. The prospect of marrying this woman bent over with moss in her hair and teeth that were green and black and nose that was hooked and her complexion. But then the silence was broken by Sir Bedivere. Sir Bedivere, Arthur's favourite knight, who stepped forward boldly and said, my lord, we have stood side by side in battle, and time and again you have saved my life. I am here today just because I am your subject. If this woman has saved your life, then I agree to marry her. There was a rustle of muttering amongst the other knights, a rustle, if you like, of relief that it wasn't them who had to marry the old crone. And the wedding was set for the next day, and you could imagine the great hall decked and the priest at one end, and the old crone was brought forward in a wedding dress and a veil, and Sir Bedivere stood at the end ready to marry her. And as she stood next to him, the veil was raised, and he looked back calmly, for he had decided this is what he would do. He didn't wince or look away. This was his destiny. He had decided what to do for his king. There was a great feast, as you would imagine, after the ceremony. And then when the feast was finished, the couple set off upstairs to the bridal suite. But when Sir Bedivere arrived in the bridal suite, in his bed was not an old crone, but a young woman of his own age. And he was startled and not left speechless. He said, can I ask what has happened? And she smiled and said, many years ago, a curse was laid upon me. A curse was laid upon me that made me have the visage of an old crone, of a bent back, of moss and black teeth and green. But if someone married me willingly, that curse might be lifted. And so the wedding night was how you'd expect it. and the breakfast was delivered the next morning. But as Sir Bedivere spoke to his new bride, she seemed quiet. She seemed reluctant to speak. "What ails you?" he said. "The curse is broken." She sighed. "Not quite," she said. "For you may have me in this state in your bed, and in the day when I walk on your arm, I will have the visage of the old crone. Or you can have me in this state as we walk through the city, but at night I will have the visage of the old crone." There is a choice. And without deliberating, Sir Bedivere turned to his new bride and said, "Bed or the city? There is a choice." And she nodded. And he said, "Well, my dear, I think the choice should be yours." And there was a moment, you know that musical note when you ping a glass? A note which tells you something is suddenly complete. For that was the final nos that undid the curse, for she was given the choice. And I can tell you that they lived happily ever after. Now, as I say, many stories of Arthur, but they have to end. And there is a final act. And picture, if you will, a moorland. A moorland after a battle. After a battle, there is smoke hanging amongst the fog. There are the cries of the wounded. The dead are lying still. There is a somber note in the air that it is hard to describe. The battle is over, but it is not all finished. For at the edge of the moorland is a chapel, a tiny building, wooden pews, and with one of those pews lies King Arthur, mortally wounded, slumped and groaning. And by his side, you have already met him, his favourite knight, Sir Bedivere. Arthur speaks in a weak voice. Your last act as my servant," he says to Sir Bedivere. "Take my sword. There is a path, a steep path. You must take my sword down that path, and there you will find a beach, and there you will see a lake stretching before you. You must throw my sword into the lake." The Bedivere is startled. Take the king's sword and throw it into the lake? There is a determination in Arthur's voice which makes him not argue. And he sets off with that great sword that we met at the beginning of our stories. And he stumbles down a steep slope with a rocky path. And he arrives at the beach and he looks out over the lake and he holds that wonderful sword in his hand, Excalibur. And he can't throw it into the lake to rust away. And he hides it in some reeds. and he takes a breath. And he looks out of the lake and he thinks to himself, what would it look like if I'd thrown it into the lake? What can I describe to the king? And he makes his way back up the steep slope, stumbling a little, and back into the chapel. And Arthur, slumped in the pew, looks at him coming through the door. What did you see? Is the only thing he says. Stuttering slightly, Sir Bedivere says, I threw the sword and it flew into the air, my lord. It flew into the air and it turned over 3 times and dropped majestically into the lake. And there was a pause. And Arthur spoke again and said, go back. Do not lie to me. Go back and throw my sword into the lake. Ashamed, Sir Bedivere turned and went back down the slope, stumbling as he went, looking out over the lake when he arrived there, wondering what to do. He retrieved the sword. He retrieved the sword from the reeds. Excalibur, the Kingmaker. How could you throw this into a common lake? The sun was going down, and there was a reflection right across the lake. And he thought, if I describe the sword twirling into the evening sun, then that will satisfy my master. And again, he hides the sword. He hides the sword amongst the reeds and makes his way back up the slope. And he comes to the door. And as he looks at Arthur, he can see a stern look on his face. But mumbling and stumbling and stammering, he says, Sir, I threw the sword and the evening light caught it. It blinked as it turned 3 times in the air. And it dropped into the lake with a splash. And Arthur spoke through gritted teeth. Do not betray me again. Go back to the shore. Take the sword. Throw it into the lake. Ashamed, Sir Bedivere made his way out to the chapel, stumbled down the slope, picking out the sword from the reeds. He stood and held it up. Excalibur. He had a last look at it and then held it back and threw it with all his might into the air. And sure enough, it spun over 3 times and the evening light caught it. But as it dropped, an arm appeared out of the lake, an arm wrapped in white samite. And as the sword dropped hilt first, the hand on the end of the arm caught the sword, and then it brandished it 3 times and drew it back under the water. Sir Bedivere looked aghast as the lake settled into stillness again. The only thing on the surface was the reflection of the evening light. He turned, almost breathless, and walked back up the slope. Arthur looked up as he walked through the door, and he knew by the look of wonder on Sir Bedivere's face that he had carried out his task at last. But still he said, "What did you see?" "My lord," he said, "I threw the sword, I threw the great Excalibur, and it turned over 3 times in the air, and the evening light glinted off it. But as it dropped, an arm appeared from the lake, an arm wrapped in white samite, and it grasped the hilt and brandished that sword 3 times and took it below the water." And Arthur, weak as he was, sighed in satisfaction and then spoke again. "Take me up," he said. "Take me up now and help me down that slope." And Sir Bedivere, half lifting, half helping, took Arthur out of the door of the chapel, and they stumbled together down the slope, holding him so he wouldn't fall. And as they reached the shore, a barge was sailing towards them, a barge with 3 figures dressed in black, a barge with no sail or no oarsman, but floating towards them nonetheless. And as it reached the shore, Sir Bedivere helped King Arthur in, and he lay down with a last grunt of pain. And the barge set off into the evening mist with no sail or no oarsman. And Sir Bedivere watched. He watched as it vanished into the evening mist, and he could see it no more. And he now knew that the age of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table was over. Thank you. Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
10-2.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming, everyone.
Thanks, Keith.
Yeah.
Whoa. I'll
It was
repeat that
an
again.
absolute pleasure,
Whoa.
Keith.
That was I'm sitting down in the midst of some Arthurian legend. I had to drag myself back into the 21st century to announce what's coming up. That was brilliant, Keith. So on Sunday, 6 o'clock in the evening, nice to see you, Tony. And Sunday, it's our worldwide story round. Everyone is welcome to come, and that's at 6 p.m. UK on Irish time. Everyone's welcome to come and tell a story or recite a poem or keep Mike Russ company. He gets so alone if no one comes in. It's he's stuck down on the Welsh border, so it's kind of lonesome down there. And then he could be a loch up in further north, but then at least you got the fish for company, Dolan.
Yes, exactly, John. Exactly.
But so please come along and keep Mike company on Sunday. And next Friday is Sarah Lloyd Winder as our children's storyteller. Meanwhile, I shall ignore the fact that I've got to have my house tidy and take photographs of it so my landlord can get a bit of finance for it so I don't get evicted. And and I shall just sit floating around in some Arthurian legend. But fantastic, Keith. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for coming along to listen. I do enjoy telling those stories. So,
Yes, I think
Pleasure.
another
Good to see you all.
a last round of applause for Keith.
Thank you very much.
And of course, we of course have to ask Louis for the for
Well,
his verdict on tonight.
Hello.
So, what's your verdict? Did you enjoy the Land of King Arthur?
Oh, I loved it. I love heard about knights. I love it.
Okay,
And it's
fantastic,
powerful too.
powerful. Yes,
Thank you, Louis. The
You're
great
welcome.
arbiter.
yes. No one else opinion matters. Louis is the only opinion that matters on Friday nights.
My comment's a little off subject. As many of you may know, Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15th. However, here in the States, we celebrate his birthday this year, this upcoming Monday, on the 19th. So I want to wish everybody a fantastic Friday, a wonderful weekend, and a magnificent Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Thank you, Baba C.
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
one of the
No,
bright.
yes.
It's one of the few bright notes that we have right now in the States. That's all I
Yeah,
got. to say.
well, it's we're talking
Yeah.
kings tonight, so
Yes,
that's,
that's right. We're talking kings. In the United States, there's a thing that goes around that says, with all with no disrespect to Great Britain, but it says the only king we recognize, Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
Yeah.
okay.
And right now, that's more potent than ever.
Absolutely. So, Waleed, once more, thank you for manning or personing the magic carpet. I shall be out there. I shall be out to see you on Tuesday. Tuesday evening, I think I get to Marrakesh for 10 days to just inspect on my annual inspection of the city, make sure the city is still there. It survived since medieval times without me, but these days I think I have to go and inspect it occasionally. Right. Okay.
I
good
can't
night.
believe it's a year since we were there last.
Yes,
altogether.
it'll be another
Yes.
year till
Amazing.
this time next year there will be the festival. So
Yeah.
That's good.
start saving up, everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. Meanwhile, fairly well. See you hopefully on Sunday.
Bye.
Until the
Bye-bye.
next time.
Oh,
Good
Good
thank
night.
you.
Bye.
You know.
Take care.
Goodbye,
Love and respect to everyone. Hey,
You.
Norm.
Bye. See ya. Bye bye.